A couple of days ago, Panasonic made available a brand new firmware update for their Panasonic hybrid mirrorless camera, the S1. This new firmware, version 2.0, would add a lot of great new features to the Panasonic S1. Probably the best feature is that you can now record to the full size of the camera's sensor, open gate recording. Essentially, this means that the S1 is now a 6K video camera like the S1H. Now, there's also several different resolutions and options available, and the file formats are of decent quality too. Not the best, but they're 420 10-bit files up to 200 megabits per second. You can record in 4K 422 in 150 megabits per second. Up until recently, the 4K in the Panasonic S1 was UHD 4K, which is 3840 by 2160. But this new update will now let you do 4K in a cinema DCI resolution, which is wider than UHD, in 60 frames per second, 10-bit as well. Now that's a big one for me because I love shooting in 4K 60 frames per second internally for shooting B-roll in my own videos and for gimbal work as well. Now, if you want to up your quality even more, the new firmware will let you record RAW out in 12-bit ProRes RAW and B-RAW. Now, if you have an anamorphic lens or two knocking around, you'll be happy to know that the S1 will now cater for anamorphic recording as well. So you can de-squeeze your image with an anamorphic lens. Something I haven't done yet myself, but I would like to try it. Now, there's a few other features such as timecode added in this upgrade, which I won't necessarily go into now. But let's just say that the S1 has all of a sudden become very like an S1H. So it's now an incredibly appealing camera. Hi, I'm Hugh Sweeney, and this is my Panasonic S1 camera, which I bought exactly 2 years ago in the middle of April 2019. I got the kit lens with it, which is the 24-105 f4 lens, and I got that with the camera because it was heavily reduced and I reckoned that I would use it. I also got an XQD card, a spare battery, and I got the MC21 EF to L adapter, which would allow me to use my Canon fit lenses on the S1 camera. I've used the S1 extensively over the last 2 years for video. It's been my main camera for shooting video productions, mostly my corporate videos, which are my main source of income, but also for this YouTube channel for my personal videos such as reviews, short films, and other stuff, other content that I've shot for myself. Now, I use the S1 a little bit for photography as well, but photography isn't my main line of work. I do mostly video, so I tended to use the Canon EOS R a little bit more for photography because I have Canon fit lenses and I was just used to that camera. But I did use the S1 a little bit as a backup camera, and I shot a lot of my own personal photographs with it as well. And some of the nicest photos I've taken over the last 2 years happen to be with the S1. When I first got the S1, I was kind of expecting it to be taking over fully from where my GH5 left off, and that it would be a full frame version of the GH5. But as soon as I scrolled through the video options in the menu system, I noticed that there was far fewer available recording formats and options, and the quality of files I could get out of this camera wasn't to be as good as the GH5. And those who bought the S1 were promised by Panasonic that there would be a software update available that would increase the quality of what the S1 can do. So about a year ago, a year after I got the camera, Panasonic Lumix made available a free software key upgrade which would increase the power of the S1 in terms of video, allowing the S1 to shoot in Vlog, 10-bit 4K, and output in 10-bit 4K 60 frames per second over HDMI. So that software key upgrade, which arrived in the post by the way, made the camera a lot better, and I really enjoyed using it since that upgrade. And fast forward another year, as of last week, with this version 2.0 software, the S1 is now even more powerful. Now, I always really liked the S1 as a video camera, and in doing this video about the camera, I realized that there's no point in me doing an extensive review about the S1 and going through all its different features and that, because there's already a load of reviews out there about the S1 on YouTube channels by creators that are a lot more knowledgeable on cameras than I am. So instead, what I'm going to do is tell you how I got on with this camera over the last 2 years, what I think of it, and what I think of it now that it's been improved even more. So what have I liked mostly about the Panasonic S1 now that I've been using it for 2 years? Well, I gotta say, the image. I've always really liked the image from the S1. The fact that it's a full frame camera, it gets lovely shallow depth of field. Plus, just the colours, the Panasonic colours have been a favourite of mine, especially when I upgraded it to Vlog back about a year ago. I could get really good colours out of the camera when graded properly in DaVinci Resolve. The dynamic range of the S1 is surprisingly good, and even though it doesn't compare to some of the other cameras out there in the market, it still is a very good dynamic range and more than adequate for most shots that you will throw at it. Definitely good enough for most stuff I do. And when the highlights do blow out, the roll-off is actually quite acceptable and doesn't look as harsh as I've seen it on other cameras. When you think about it, it shouldn't be surprising that the S1 has a really nice image because it's almost identical to the image of the S1H. In fact, you probably won't even be able to tell the difference between the S1 and the S1H. And the S1H is a Netflix approved camera. In fact, the S1 might have a slightly sharper image if you pixel peep because it hasn't got that anti-aliasing filter installed in it. But the fact that it doesn't have that filter means that you might get a slight little bit of pattern interference on very fine fabrics and in certain scenarios. Since the camera got Vlog about a year ago, I've been really impressed with the low light sensitivity of the S1. It's been very, very good, and when this camera was released, it wasn't to have dual native ISO, but Panasonic Lumix kind of snuck it in there with that Vlog upgrade, and users noticed that when they went up in the ISOs from 640, which is the native ISO of Vlog, as they went up in the ISOs, it started to get noisier and noisier, and then when you reach ISO 4000, it went clean as a whistle, and it's been great in low light scenarios. Before I got my S1, I shot with the GH5 for 2 years, and that was the first camera that I owned that had in-body image stabilisation, and I found the GH5 to be just absolutely brilliant for handheld filmmaking. It's also been really good on the S1, so that is a big plus for me, having used this camera for the last 2 years, is to be able to do stuff handheld with this camera and just achieve those super smooth handheld shots, especially when you're shooting in higher frame rates. You're conforming it back to a 24 frames per second timeline. You're getting that sort of 40% playback speed from 60 frames per second to 24, giving you a lovely smooth shot. So you can do, you know, nice sweeps handheld and stuff and get that lovely, almost like a slider effect. Now, it's worked well on adapted lenses, but it's worked even better on the actual native mount lens. So I opted to shoot with the kit lens there a few times to get really smooth handheld shots, and that's been really good, and it's a big plus with the S1. And I think that the S1's stabilization, as far as I know, is as good as any other camera out there, including the newer ones. I can honestly say that it's a bit better than the stabilization on the R5, but it's great to have it on the R5 as well. Since the S1 was released, I think there's been a slight misunderstanding that this camera is big and heavy and awkward, and trust me, it's anything but. I actually find this camera to be ergonomically perfect in the hands. Maybe I've big hands, big spade fingers, I don't know, I thought my hands were pretty normal, but I have found this camera to feel really nice in the hand. I've always enjoyed the size of it. I don't really want a smaller camera. It's full of buttons, many which are assigned to different settings which you want straight away, like ISO, white balance and focus settings, and then you can assign as many buttons as you want to whatever setting you want on there. So it's loaded with buttons. I don't know a camera out there that has more buttons, and a lot of them light up as well, but you might forget that after a while. You might notice it. The dials too are great. There's a dial on the back that lets you actually press it as well as turn it, and I found that to be really good. You can't do that on the EOS R, it won't let you press it. So for just navigating the image and going through menus, those dials, joysticks, buttons are really good, and it's one of the best cameras I've noticed for that. One thing that has annoyed me is it's just the easiest camera to record. I never actually set the shutter button to do full press for record. It's half press for record. So that means that I end up with these small little recordings everywhere anytime I go out and about, and you just have to look at the camera and it starts recording. And on many occasions I found that the camera was recording when I wasn't looking at it. So that's just one little thing. The top screen there is great. To be honest, I rarely even look at that top screen. I only use it to check battery and to see if I need to charge a new battery, but it's good to have it. Now, with the whole flippy screen thing, obviously it would be better if the screen flipped out and faced you for your own personal content, but when you're not shooting your own personal content and you're not looking at the camera, it's actually better for me, speaking personally, to have that flippy screen on the back. And I've always liked the screen on the S1 and the way it just flips out and you can move it about, and it's been good for handheld filming and really good for gimbal work as well. So I've liked the screen on there. It's very detailed, as is the EVF, and even, believe it or not, the eyepiece behind the EVF, that round rubber circle, has been very comfortable to look through on the S1. So ergonomically, as it feels in the hand, it's a little bit clunky in the design department. It's not going to win any design competitions, but I've liked it since day one, and I think it's a great looking camera. I just want to give a product mention here. check out the Energy Tube light from YC Onion. As you can see, I'm using it here in this video to light the S1. I got this sent out to me from Gear a few weeks back, and I've been using it ever since. As well as being quite a powerful light, it's got all the usual bells and whistles that you'd expect from a good LED light, such as temperature control, something that's vital for us filmmakers. It also has colourful effects stuff as well that can be incredibly convenient when filmmaking. Say if you want to emulate a police car or a lightning strike or something like that, it's absolutely perfect. I just have one of these lights, but if you have two or more, you can actually join them together and make a longer strip light. Plus it's magnetic too, which is very handy, and the app works really well for remotely adjusting the light. So check out the YC Onion Energy Tube. It's available on pergear.com, a well-established online shop for great filmmaking stuff. Now it's time to get back to the video. Now I used the S1 a little bit for photography. There was a few months past there whilst I was waiting for my R5 and I had sold the EOS R, where I had to rely on the S1 as my main photography camera for those small photography jobs. I did buy a little flash transmitter so I could use my Canon flashes, and it's a great photography camera. Is it the best photography camera? Probably not. You know, it's a couple of years old and it's aimed in the middle there. It's got a 24 megapixel sensor, but I just found the images from it just fantastic. So it's a great photography camera, particularly with the L mount lenses. When I adapted my EF lenses, things were a little bit slower in terms of focusing, but the focusing accuracy was really good. And I got some of the nicest images I shot over the last 2 years. Personal images were shot on the S1. So if photography is your thing as well as video, I think it's actually one of the best cameras out there that does both. It really is. Even today, there's very few cameras that will do as nice photograph and video and have such professional video features, especially since the upgrade, than the S1. So it's good at both, and obviously the S1H is good too, but for photography the S1H is a lot heavier and it's more awkward. So this is a good photography camera, not the best, but good. As I said at the start of the video, I only bought one spare battery for this camera, and I intended on getting more, but I've actually managed over 2 years to just use 2 batteries for this camera. And it might be a reflection of the type of work I do. I tend not to do long form videos of concerts and interviews. I tend mostly to do sort of creative corporate work, and usually when I go somewhere I can plug in a charger, and I've never actually felt the need to get a third battery. I do have 3 for my Canon, but I've got 2 for this and it's worked out fine, and you know, I found it to be adequate for me. That's all I can say about the battery. So what are some of the negatives I've found from using the S1 over the last 2 years? The first biggie is the autofocus. Autofocus has been really frustrating for me because there's times it's worked out well and then I rely on it and then it misfocuses, and because I don't have a front-facing screen, I think that I'm in focus and then the shot I'm completely out of focus. So for a lot of my own content where I'm shooting vlogs and pieces to camera for YouTube videos, the autofocus has completely let me down, and I've decided even recently not to use the autofocus and opt to use for manual focus lens, my wide angle lens. So I've been shooting some stuff wide angle lately on a manual cine lens, and it's worked out better, because the last thing you want now is to be just going out shooting and not to be in focus. And even when you're not shooting yourself and you're shooting different subject matter and you want to use autofocus, and when you're pressing on the screen, sometimes you get a little bit of pulsing there, which isn't good, and you don't want that in a shot. You don't want any sign of hunting for focus. And I just think that to get best results from the Panasonic S1 when you're shooting a video for one of your clients or something, it's just to switch it off, do your own focus pulls, rely fully on manual focusing, and it's just a safer bet than doing autofocus. So it's just a shame really that this is one of the downsides. It is a big downside for the S1. So if you're going to buy a camera to shoot your own content and you're doing pieces to camera, I really wouldn't recommend the S1. Maybe the S5 is better, but definitely I think Sony and Canon are streets ahead. A big thing that has caught me out over the last 2 years is the crop factor in 60 frames per second. Because I like to shoot 60 frames per second alongside 24 frames per second. That means I can insert nice slow motion B-roll into my 24 frames per second timeline. Just straight away, you know, you're shooting on 24, you've got the full frame image, and then you want to do some B-roll, and all of a sudden that 24mm lens is cropping in quite a bit, and it's like a 40mm lens. You lose depth of field when you crop in because you have to recompose, you have to use wider angle lenses. It's a little bit of a bummer there to have a full frame camera and shooting in 4K 60 frames per second, but not to be able to do that in full frame. Now, crop isn't the worst thing in the world if you're shooting other things like wildlife and sports, it's okay to have a bit of crop in there, but generally speaking it's nice to avail of that shallow depth of field that you can get from a full frame sensor by using the whole sensor. Now the S1 doesn't have a filter on it like the S1H. I've noticed once or twice when photographing or filming scenes that might have a fabric from a couch or a bed or something, or maybe even a shirt or a suit, you might notice that moire kicking in, and it can be a little bit of a nuisance. I probably wouldn't recommend this camera if you were a fashion photographer or doing weddings where you're photographing a lot of men's suits. Probably not the best camera for dealing with fine patterns because of the lack of that filter. Also, when out and about shooting trees where I'm in the outdoors and I'm using autofocus, I noticed that when the autofocus was pulsing, it created this really unsightly flicker effect on the very fine branches and leaves on trees, and that really was annoying. Those are a few negatives about the S1 that I've noticed over the last 2 years, but I can honestly say that there's more to like about this camera than to dislike. And with the latest firmware update now, this is a more attractive camera than ever, even though it's 2 years old. So what are a few other cameras in the market that you might actually alternatively choose over the S1? So one camera that's in contention in the same price range with the S1 is actually the new Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro camera. It shoots B-RAW, it shoots ProRes. I don't think there's a camera that has nicer internal codec than that camera, and the colors on the Blackmagic 6K Pro are just unbeatable. Plus you get a free copy of DaVinci Resolve as well. So that is a really good contender if you're in that sort of $2,500 price range. The S1 still comes out on top in a lot of areas. If you do want the RAW, you can now record RAW externally to one of your devices like the Video Assist or the actual Ninja V, and you get image stabilisation as well, meaning that you can shoot handheld with the S1 and you can't really shoot handheld with the Pocket. I'm sorry, but you can't. It's just not the same shooting handheld with cameras that don't have in-body stabilisation. Now if you're using full frame lenses as well, you're going to use more of the glass with those lenses on the S1 than if you used it on a Pocket. So those are a few reasons to get this over the actual Pocket 6K. Now one camera you could get is the Sony a7S3 or the FX3, the more cine version. Now those cameras are priced a lot more than the actual S1. I do believe the a7S3 is about $1,500 more than the S1 in America, and I think it's about 1,800 euros more here in Europe, so that's a huge price range difference there. The a7S3 is a great camera. It shoots in 4K. It's got an awful lot going for it in terms of focus and all that, but the S1 does 6K and the a7S3 does 4K, so there's a difference for you. Plus the S1 is going to be a better photography camera. It might have slightly better image stabilization, I'm not too sure, but again, it's the price range. It's in a different price range now, so that's going to be a huge reason to choose. But if I had a few spare grand tomorrow, I would probably get a Sony FX3. You could get an S5. It is a good bit cheaper. It's smaller and lighter. It's $800 cheaper in America as far as I know, and about $500 cheaper here in Europe. There's a few differences between the S5 and the S1. I think the EVF differences and stuff are very minor. I don't think many people will notice that the S5 doesn't have as good a resolution on the EVF as the S1. The S1 might be better for photography. It might have slightly better image stabilization, but it does 6K and the S5 doesn't do 6K as of now. So there's a few advantages there to the S1 over the S5. But I think realistically, a lot of you watching this video might be better and happier with the S5. It has a front-facing screen, better for vlogs and all that. So that is a little bit of a contender there. Now the Canon R6 is hard to ignore. It's in a similar price range. It might be slightly more expensive than the S1. Are the colors as nice in 4K as the S1? Does it shoot in 6K? No, it doesn't. Is the dynamic range as good? Possibly not. Is it as good in low light? Possibly not. There's a few options there, but I think the R6 is going to be a slightly better photography camera. It's got a front-facing screen. It's going to be better as a YouTube camera than the S1, probably much better. Also, the S1 has better codecs, internal codecs to use if you want to shoot there. It's got a full-size HDMI port as well. So there's a few trade-offs there But generally, if you're shooting your own content for YouTube, the R6 is going to be better than the S1. And as for the R5, this camera here, it's a fantastic camera, but it's a nightmare to edit. I'm not going to mention Nikon or Fuji or some other brands. I'm just not familiar enough with them, but those are some options. I still think the S1 is incredibly competitive, especially now. Once again, I mention this update all the time. It is a lot better now that it's updated. Now, if you're going for Panasonic, you are using an L-mount fitting for your lenses, and Panasonic are in the L-mount alliance, as Jared Polin would say it, which means that basically there's different camera brands that are using L-mount. There's not that many, namely Sigma, Leica, and of course Lumix. So those are the L-mount cameras, and when I used the Sigma FP to try out last year, it was an L-mount camera and it would autofocus with my L-mount Lumix lens. That is something to be, you know, thinking of if you are investing in this system. Maybe down the line Sigma will bring out a really nice camera that you'll use all your L-mount lenses from your Panasonic camera on. So that's a really good advantage, because I just dropped $2.5 to get this 24-70 lens for the R5, and I cannot use that lens on any other system. Those RF lenses from Canon are very good, they're brilliant lenses. I don't think there's lenses out there that are as good. I cannot use them anywhere else as of now, but Sigma are probably one of the best lens manufacturers available out there at the moment, and they are known for making lenses that have the same quality image as the more expensive lenses from the likes of Canon and Panasonic, but they're usually a lot cheaper. For example, a 24-70 Sigma f2.8 lens is cheaper than the f4 24-105 kit lens for this camera right here. So Sigma are making these really good lenses, and they're going to make more and more L-mount lenses, and that's something to bear in mind, that if you're getting the S1, you know, as opposed to a Sony or a Canon, you're going to have the ability to cross-platform those lenses, which is a very, very cool thing if you ask me. Now, Panasonic's own lenses are very, very expensive. They're just as expensive as the Canon RF lenses, so get used to that as well. But as I said, those Sigma lenses are going to come in at a good price, and you'll get some really nice Sigma lenses for not so much cash. So that's all I can say on the S1 camera as of now. I found it to be a great camera for me. I do still like it, and I love it now that I can shoot 6K in it. And I'm dying to get hold of either a Video Assist from Blackmagic or a Ninja 5 from Atomos and see what that external signal is going to be like, and get some cool raw 6K raw 12-bit out over that HDMI and get it into DaVinci Resolve and see how it grades. So I'm excited about that, and I'm going to hold on to the S1 as of now, because I have it for 2 years now, and it's done its thing. It's kind of paid for itself, and I'm not actually that worried about the camera now. I recently put it up on the roof of the car and shot some stuff using those Zeppin suction cups, and you know, I wouldn't do that if I had a brand new FX3 or with my R5. So the fact that I have it for a while, I'm not as worried about it, and that's another good reason for holding on to it. I don't have to worry about it. I can throw it in a bag and bring it with me and get some cool shots. So that's another thing I'm loving about my S1. So if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. Give me a thumbs up if you can for the video. It's good for me. And leave a comment down below, ask a question, and I will get back to you. And plus, I'm on the socials as well. I'm on Instagram and Facebook in there. I'll leave the links down here below. So that's all from me for now, folks. I'll see you next time, and take care. Good luck.